Hello and welcome back to the space between ideas. We've been looking at these four quadrants and trying to understand the difference between a crazy, wild-eyed scientist and an auditor. What's better, or what should you be? How do you manage a team when you have different people like this? And that's a good question. Speaking to people over the years, people talk about performance and they talk about if you want to get some kind of output, then likely you need to control your input. That means that you're not really going to change your employees too much. Maybe you can improve their performance to some extent, some small percentage, or maybe you can provide some kind of incentive. But overall, it's going to be a long and difficult process. It's much better to focus on your hiring practices and making sure that you have a business and you have a team and you have a corporate culture that attracts highly efficient and effective people. We need to define specifically what kind of people we're looking for. Likely, if you are working for some company of auditors, then you're not going to want to hire too many crazy, wild-eyed scientists. But if you are a crazy, wild-eyed scientist firm, then likely you might not be trying to find too many auditors. Maybe we just want everyone like Steve Jobs. We just want the innovator. We want the civil engineer. It depends on the situation. Anyways, I think I fleshed out that idea clear enough. And what we learned from the 5 personality traits is that it's important to understand the personality of the person because that is going to be the motivation for that person to do the job. If the job, it's about creativity and innovation and looking for new breakthrough ideas, then probably you want somebody who has the natural proclivity to do that type of work. Why? Now we're going to go down into the Fogg's motivation model. That's why I started this discussion out with the 5 personality traits, is because I knew that we were headed to the Fogg's motivation model. And Fogg's motivation model is also 4 quadrants. Although in this image, it doesn't look like, maybe it doesn't look like there's 4 quadrants, but there actually is. The 4 quadrants are, we have something called motivating behavior. This means that it's really interesting. Someone has a natural proclivity to do that type of work. Then you have boring behavior. And so the person is not interested in that kind of work. And then, in the y-axis down where it says ability, then we have difficult behavior, meaning that this is really difficult, meaning it takes a huge amount of IQ. It takes a huge amount of knowledge to be able to do this type of work. And then we have simple behavior, which means that you don't have to have a huge IQ. And you put those quadrants together, and what happens is you see that there are 2 areas. One is called no action, and one is called action. And the question is, how do you get past the activation threshold? How do you move from no action to action? We can kind of blend the 2 ideas together. If we say it's something like motivating behavior says that you have this natural desire or your interest is in that thing. We can overlap, we can't directly overlap 2 tables, but what we can do is we can take the box. So we have 3 boxes. We have our scientist, we have our innovator, and we have our auditor. And so we can take those 3 and put it into that top corner. If we're working with an auditor, or if we're working with an innovator, or if we're working with a crazy wild-eyed scientist, as long as that's what motivates them, then we're talking about something which is a motivating behavior. Then the question is, what is the ability of that person? If we're looking at a first-year student, crazy wild-eyed scientist, compared to a 60-year-old professor, crazy wild-eyed scientist, then of course we have a huge difference in the ability. And so if it's the same task, then perhaps a first-year student is in the no action section and a 60-year-old professor is in the action area, because they have the ability to get the job done, even though perhaps both of them are equally motivated to do the work. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that is when you try to get a crazy, wild-eyed scientist to do the work of an auditor. This is work for a crazy, wild-eyed scientist, but the person that we pick to do the job is an auditor, which means what? So that it just drops. The auditor is not motivated to do this intense, creative, find new things in the universe work. That's just not what interests them. They don't feel like that's something that grasps them. And so now we are in the boring behavior, and it doesn't really matter if it's simple for them to do it or not. It could be difficult, so it's in the bottom left-hand corner, so it's boring and difficult, or it could be boring and easy. But in either case, you see it's still in the no action zone. And it's not until you find the right person for the right job that you are able to move up in the motivation. And then also you have to make sure that the person has enough skill so that you can move them into the ability. And that's what helps them to cross the activation threshold. All right, so the last point in this little framework is like, okay, so what if we have somebody who is motivated, but they're having a hard time getting the work done? Well, then that's what we call a facilitation trigger, because the person needs some education, they need some help, they need some tools, they need something that can help them to cross that barrier. And it's an intellectual barrier. It means that there's a skill or a process that they aren't aware of. And so when they try to do the work, even though they're really motivated to do the work, they can't get the work done. And so as a manager, you need to, when you see that happening with your people, you need to ask them about their tools and their knowledge, and then you need to provide an environment where they can succeed. This word is called empower. Now, it's the opposite with this other area. If you have somebody who's like, well, I mean, I can do it, but it's like, it's not so interesting. It could be like a computer programmer, and I know how to make websites. In fact, I know how to make databases. In fact, I know how to make AI. And you're like, yeah, but we just need you to add this little menu on our website. And they're like, they can do it, but they're just like, I don't want to do it. And so then we need to find the spark. And sometimes the spark is, you're fired. And sometimes the spark is, we'll give you a pizza party once you finish the menu. Or sometimes the spark is, whatever. See, and that's the thing is like, now it brings us back to the same problem we had before, which is what motivates you? What kind of spark is motivating for you? In either case, we're still coming back to the fundamental nature of people. As you can see, it doesn't matter if it's a spark or if it's facilitation. The most important factor, just like we talked about in the last video, is the personality traits of the person. What is the person interested in? And so that's what brings us into the next video, where we're going to talk about state purposes. And this is what I keep coming back to, is we need to define exactly what kind of people that we're talking about, and then find the right person for the job.